billionaire CEO with $7 billion mocked a struggling waitress with an impossible challenge in front of his entire business circle. But what she said next didn't just stun him. It shattered every assumption he had about people, power, and what it truly means to be valuable. This is the story of how one moment of brilliance changed everything. Marcus Webb was sitting at his corner table at Riverside, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. He was looking at his phone, barely paying attention to anything else around him. He had made $7 billion in the technology and real estate industries, and most people knew him as someone who took what he wanted and discarded what he didn't need. He looked up from his phone just long enough to make a joke to the server standing in front of him, asking her where she would invest $1 million. Her name was Sophie Chen, and she had been on her feet working at Riverside for 8 hours already that night. Sophie paused for just a moment, her pen hovering above her notepad. She had been warned by her coworkers about Marcus Webb. They told her he was the type of customer who liked to play games with people who couldn't fight back. She had dealt with men like him before, rich, bored, and looking for someone to mock. But something in the way he asked made her decide to actually answer him. She kept her face neutral and professional, though her dark eyes showed that she understood exactly what he was doing. She began to explain that she would take 40% of the money and invest it in exchange-traded funds that focused on emerging markets and companies working on sustainable energy projects. She would put 30% into stocks of mid-sized companies that seemed to be underpriced compared to what they were actually worth, because the overall market had made a mistake in pricing them. Another 20% would go into municipal bonds, which would save on taxes. The remaining 10% she would keep in cash, ready to grab opportunities when they appeared suddenly. Marcus put down his phone. He had expected to hear something foolish, maybe something he would laugh about later with his friends. Instead, he was hearing detailed financial strategy from someone wearing a server's uniform. He studied her face carefully, looking for signs that she had simply memorized something from a book or a website. Sophie looked directly back at him. She said that was just her opinion about how to handle his hypothetical $1 million, but that she should probably focus on taking his actual food order now. Marcus leaned forward. He wanted to know why she thought emerging markets made sense. He promised that if she would just sit with him for 5 minutes and explain, he would make sure she didn't get in trouble with her manager. Sophie hesitated, but the manager came over right away when Marcus waved at him and said he was having a business conversation. The manager practically bowed and told her she could take whatever time she needed. Sophie sat down at Marcus's table, though she did not look happy about it. She said this was not appropriate. Marcus said that her investment advice had not seemed appropriate either, but it had been interesting. He told her to explain the part about why she liked emerging markets so much. Sophie explained that the mature markets in Western countries already had too much money chasing the same opportunities in green energy. She said this had created a bubble where prices were too high. Meanwhile, countries that were still developing had much larger needs for energy and infrastructure. These countries did not have as many rules and restrictions, so investors could work more easily. Also, these governments desperately wanted foreign companies to invest money in their infrastructure, so they offered special tax breaks that could increase investment returns by at least 4% every single year. Marcus's eyes got wider. This was not just informed opinion. It was sophisticated thinking about economics and markets. He asked her directly who she was and where this knowledge came from. Sophie smiled slightly and said she was just a server with a real interest in finance, but that he still needed to give her his actual food order. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. He could tell there was much more to her story than she was revealing, but he respected people who knew how to set boundaries. He ordered a ribeye steak, rare, with truffle-flavored pasta on the side. He also asked for her real name. She told him it was Sophie Chen, and she said she would put his order into the kitchen right away. Throughout the rest of his meal, Marcus could not stop watching her. She moved through the restaurant with the kind of smooth, practiced efficiency that came from years of experience. She had a quiet dignity about her, even though she was wearing a server's uniform. Most of the women Marcus went out with, models, socialites, actresses, seemed to demand constant attention and admiration. This woman appeared to be doing the opposite, trying to avoid notice while still doing her job perfectly. When Sophie brought his check, Marcus added a $5,000 tip to his $300 meal. Sophie's face showed genuine shock when she saw it. She said the tip was too much money. Marcus told her to think of it as payment for the financial consulting work she had done. He also said that her advice had been better than what he got from half the people who worked for him at his investment company. Sophie refused to accept the money. Marcus insisted that she would accept it, and that he meant what he was saying. He gave her his private phone number written on the back of his business card. He told her that when she changed her mind about working with him, she should call him because he had a business proposal that he thought would interest someone with her kind of unusual talent. That night, Sophie leaned against a cold brick wall in the employee locker room at Riverside, staring at Marcus's business card. $5,000. That was exactly how much she needed to pay for next semester's college tuition. She was studying for a part-time MBA at a state university. Her coworker Mia asked if she was okay. Sophie said everything was fine, just a strange customer. Mia said that Marcus Webb was the billionaire guy who had taken up all of Sophie's time during her shift. Mia rolled her eyes and asked what he had wanted. Sophie smiled slightly and said he wanted financial advice. Mia laughed and said sure, and she gave quantum physics lectures on the side. Mia said that men like Marcus only wanted one thing from waitresses, but this time it was different. Sophie changed out of her work uniform and put on her worn pea coat. Outside, the October air was crisp and cold as she walked to the subway. In her mind, she kept replaying the conversation with Marcus. It had been reckless to show how much she actually knew about finance. She had spent 3 years being very careful to hide who she really was and what she was capable of doing. She had kept her identity a secret. Now in just 5 minutes, she had almost blown everything apart just because a rich man had annoyed her, and she wanted to prove he was wrong to underestimate her. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her roommate asking if she had her share of the rent money. It was due tomorrow. Sophie closed her eyes. The $5,000 would be enough to pay for her tuition and her half of the rent, with plenty left over to buy groceries for months and months. But taking that money felt dangerous because it would create a connection with Marcus Webb that she could not afford to have. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from the University Financial Aid Office. She opened it with shaking hands. The email said that her request for additional financial help had been turned down. Without that extra aid money, even if she took Marcus's $5,000 tip, she would not have enough money to make it through the semester. Everything she had worked for during the last 3 years, the careful plan to rebuild her life from nothing, was falling apart. Before she could think about it anymore, Sophie pulled out Marcus's card and called his private phone number. He answered on the second ring. He said that he had expected her to call, but he had not expected it to be so fast. Sophie swallowed hard and told him she wanted to hear more about the business proposition he had mentioned. She could hear the satisfaction in his voice. He asked if she was free tomorrow. Sophie said she had class until 2 in the afternoon, then work at 5 in the evening. Marcus said his office at 3 would be perfect and he would text her the address. Sophie asked what exactly the proposition was. Marcus paused briefly before answering. He said let's just say he could use someone with her financial instincts, because his regular consultants were too stuck in conventional ways of thinking. She clearly thought differently than everyone else. He said the compensation would be enough that she would never have to wait tables again. Sophie closed her eyes. It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But she agreed to be at his office at 3 the next day. Before she hung up, Marcus said something that made her stop. He told her that regardless of what she might have heard about him from other people, he did not mix business with pleasure. He said if she came to work for him, it would be a real job with real professional boundaries. The phone call ended, and Sophie was left with a strange feeling that she had just made either the smartest decision of her life or the worst one. The next day at precisely 2:59 in the afternoon, Sophie stepped out of an elevator onto the 87th floor of the tall, gleaming building that housed Marcus Webb's investment company. The woman sitting at the front desk looked her up and down, taking in Sophie's simple black skirt and white blouse. It was the nicest outfit Sophie owned, but it was clearly not good enough by the standards of this place. The receptionist's tone suggested that Sophie had walked into the wrong building. Sophie told the receptionist that she had an appointment to see Marcus Webb at 3 o'clock. The receptionist's perfectly groomed eyebrows rose up. She asked if Sophie had an appointment. Sophie said yes at 3 o'clock. The receptionist checked her computer with obvious doubt, but then her face changed to surprise. She said Sophie's name was on the schedule and directed her to have a seat. Sophie sat on the edge of a very uncomfortable modern chair and waited. She became increasingly aware that she did not fit in with this world of glass, steel, and silent disapproval. 3 years ago, she would have walked into this office with complete confidence. She would have been wearing expensive designer clothes, and her credentials would never have been questioned. Now everything was different. A man with salt and pepper hair and a serious face approached her. His name was David Pierce, and he was Marcus's chief of staff. He did not offer to shake her hand. Instead, he told her that Marcus had asked him to take her to his office. Sophie followed him through a maze of glass-walled offices where financial analysts sat hunched over multiple computer screens full of numbers and data. Nobody looked up as she passed by. Pierce stopped at a large corner office with amazing views of the whole city spread out below. He told her to wait there. Through the glass wall, Sophie could see Marcus sitting behind a massive desk, frowning at whatever Pierce was saying to him. Marcus looked up and saw Sophie watching him. He waved her inside and dismissed Pierce with a quick nod of his head. Up here in his office, on his own territory, Marcus Webb seemed even more powerful and impressive than he had been at the restaurant. His suit probably cost more money than Sophie made in 3 months of work. He had the relaxed confidence of someone who controlled everything in his environment. Sophie suddenly felt very small and out of place. Sophie observed that Marcus's chief of staff did not seem to approve of this meeting. Marcus's mouth curved slightly upward. He said Pierce did not approve of most things, and that was actually why he kept him around. He studied Sophie's face for a moment. He said she looked different. Sophie raised one eyebrow. She asked what he meant. Marcus said she seemed more confident than she had the night before, but also more on guard. He said that the previous night when he had caught her off her guard, he had seen something genuine. Now she seemed to be protecting herself with a wall. Sophie said she was always genuine, just very selective about who she showed things to. Marcus laughed genuinely at this answer. Marcus told her that he had done some research on her. Sophie felt tense immediately. Marcus said it was nothing invasive, just basic background information. He said she had gone to community college and was now working as a server while studying for a part-time MBA. It seemed like a solid path forward, but it did not explain her level of knowledge about financial markets. Sophie said she read a lot. Marcus's bluntness was startling and uncomfortable. He said that what she had given him yesterday was not just book knowledge. It was the kind of real insight that could only come from actual experience working in markets. His eyes locked onto hers. He asked her directly, so who was she really? For a moment, Sophie considered standing up and walking out. The memory of that rejection email from the financial aid office kept her in her seat. She asked if it really mattered who she was. She said Marcus had told her he had a business proposition. Marcus studied her for a long time, then nodded. He seemed to decide to let the question about her identity go, at least for now. He said he needed a fresh perspective on some investment opportunities. He pressed a button on his desk and a hidden panel in the wall opened to reveal a large computer screen. The screen showed several prospective investments in different industries. Sophie's eyes widened as she looked at the information. Sophie stood up and walked over to the screen. She said these were all pre-IPO opportunities in emerging markets, the kind of investments you make in companies before they sell stock to the public. Marcus nodded. He said they were risky but could be very rewarding. He said his team was split down the middle. Half wanted to invest heavily and half wanted to avoid them completely. He gestured toward the screen and asked what Sophie thought. Sophie stood up and moved closer to the screen, studying all the numbers very carefully. She asked if she could use the keyboard beneath the screen. Marcus nodded and watched her intently as she began to work. Sophie typed commands to pull up more data and rearrange the information in different ways. As she worked, she forgot about Marcus Webb, forgot about her terrible situation, forgot about everything except the familiar satisfaction of doing financial analysis. Finally, she stepped back from the screen. She pointed at 3 of the companies and said they had solid fundamentals and management teams with proven track records. She pointed at 2 others and said they were overpriced based on what their market penetration would probably be. Then she pointed at one company that seemed promising at first. She said this one, a renewable energy company, was a sophisticated fraud. Marcus's expression sharpened immediately. He demanded an explanation. Sophie pointed to specific numbers in the report. She said their reported growth pattern was too smooth and perfect. Real growth always has ups and downs and problems. When you cross-reference their reported manufacturing capacity with the amount of energy they said they were consuming at their facilities, she pulled up the relevant data and showed him. The numbers do not add up. They claim they are producing at levels that would require at least 40% more electricity than what they are actually using. It looks like they are lying about how much they make. Marcus stood and moved beside her, studying the data with new intensity. His shoulder almost touched hers as he leaned in to look more carefully. He asked quietly how she had caught something that his whole team of analysts had missed. Sophie hesitated. She said it was pattern recognition and that she had seen similar problems before. Marcus turned to look at her and their faces were suddenly very close together. Her response made him take a small step backward. He pointed out that the whole thing was a common fraudulent pattern. But his entire team of highly trained analysts with degrees from top universities had not caught it at all. In fact, they had been recommending this company as their primary investment target. Sophie felt a rush of satisfaction and validation, but she tried to push the feeling down. This was not her world anymore. She could not afford to get pulled back in. She said she needed to leave because she would be late for work. Marcus said sharply that she should not go back to the restaurant. Sophie asked what he meant. Marcus said he wanted to hire her as a consultant exclusively. He offered her her own office in his building and a salary in the millions. He said she could have complete anonymity, working primarily from her apartment if she wanted. Sophie stared at him without speaking. She said he could not possibly be serious. Marcus said he was never anything except serious when it came to finding talent. He said she had something that his team of Ivy League MBA holders did not have. He wanted her ability working for him instead of serving expensive food. The offer was like a dream come true, a way back into the life she had lost, the career that had been taken from her. But at what price? And how long before he discovered the truth about who she really was? Sophie said she could not accept. She said this even though every part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Marcus's face hardened. He demanded to know why. He said do not tell him she preferred working as a server. Sophie said it was complicated. Marcus said to uncomplicate it or at least tell him what she was afraid of. Sophie met his gaze directly. She asked what made him think she was afraid. Marcus said because it was obvious that she was overqualified for her current life, which meant she was hiding. People only hide like this when they are afraid. His observation was uncomfortably accurate. Sophie looked away toward the spectacular view of the city that had once been her playground, but had become her prison. She finally said that she could not be publicly connected with Marcus's company or any financial institution. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He asked why. Sophie said that part was personal. Marcus said it was not personal if she was going to work for him. He crossed his arms. He said he needed to know what he would be getting into. Sophie hesitated, and then she decided to tell him a partial truth. She said she had made some enemies in the financial world, powerful enemies. She said it was better for everybody if she stayed invisible and separate from the business world. Marcus studied her for a long moment in silence. He asked what would happen if he could guarantee her complete anonymity. He said she could work under a false name, have a private office where nobody could see her and have absolutely no public connection to his company. Would she accept the job then? Sophie asked why he would do all this for someone he had just met, for someone who had just spotted fraud that his whole team missed. Marcus said absolutely he would do that. He stepped closer to her. He said he had not built his company by ignoring exceptional talent. The way he said her name, with a mixture of curiosity and something that almost looked like respect, made her pause. The logical part of her brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea, that she was risking everything she had rebuilt so carefully over 3 years. But the part of her that had been buried and hidden, the part that was a real analyst, the part that loved the intellectual challenge and complexity of finance, that part was waking up and hungry for this opportunity. Sophie said she would need everything in writing with ironclad confidentiality agreements. She said she needed to work remotely and not from his office. Marcus smiled slowly, and the smile changed his whole face. He said so that was a yes. Sophie corrected him and said it was a conditional maybe, pending her review of the contract. Marcus said he would have his legal team draw up the paperwork that very night. 2 weeks into her job as a consultant for Marcus Webb, Sophie was finally beginning to relax. The work was exciting and challenging in ways that serving food could never be. Marcus had kept his promise about her privacy. He assigned her work under the code name CM Consulting, and he let her work mostly from her apartment. She only came to the office for important meetings. Today was one of those days. She arrived early, hoping to slip into the conference room before all the senior executives arrived. Her plan did not work. She found Marcus already there, sleeves rolled up, studying projections on the big screen. Marcus noticed that she was early. Sophie pointed out that so was he. Marcus said that it was his company, so he was never early. He was just present whenever he needed to be. He finally turned to face her and said she looked better. Sophie raised one eyebrow. Marcus said she seemed more confident and less like she was expecting someone to throw her out of the room. He gestured to the chair beside his at the head of the table. Marcus said the work agreed with her. It was true. The past 2 weeks had been transformative in many ways. The money Marcus paid her allowed her to finally pay her tuition in full, move to a nicer apartment, and sleep at night without constant anxiety about money. More than anything, using her real skills felt like she was taking back a part of herself that had been stolen from her. Sophie said the work was fine. She took a seat in the middle of the table instead of next to Marcus. Jack noticed her choice, but he did not say anything about it. Marcus said that was more than fine. He reminded her that she had identified 2 potential frauds and flagged concerns about a management team that they later found out was stealing money. He said she was excelling. Sophie shrugged, uncomfortable with being praised. She said she was just doing what he hired her to do. Marcus studied her for a moment. He said he really could not figure out why someone with her talent was working as a server in the first place. He said that even with an MBA from a good school, she clearly knew more than most of his analysts already. Sophie tensed. She had been waiting for him to ask this specific question. He leaned against the conference table and said he had been in this business for over a decade. He said he knew most of the major players. He asked who exactly she was hiding from. Before Sophie could formulate a response, David Pierce came through the door. Several executives followed him. The chief of staff shot Sophie a suspicious glance before he addressed Marcus. He said everyone had arrived and asked if they should begin. Marcus's eyes stayed on Sophie for a moment longer before he nodded. He said, "Let's start." The meeting proceeded efficiently with charts and projections flashing across the screen. Various department heads presented their analyses of the acquisition target they were considering. Sophie listened carefully and made notes, but she did not speak for a long time. After the last presentation finished, Marcus asked if the general agreement was to move forward with the acquisition. Everyone nodded. He asked Sophie what she thought since she had been quiet. All eyes turned to her. She could feel Pierce's particular gaze heavy with disapproval. Sophie said carefully that she had concerns. Pierce muttered under his breath that of course she did. Marcus shot him a warning look. Sophie stood and walked to the screen. She began pulling up specific data points from the report. She said that the company's algorithm was not as special and proprietary as they claimed. The core functionality used pieces of code that were available to everyone, with only minimal changes made to them. What they were really selling was the information they had collected. But even that had problems. She highlighted several errors in how the target company reported their performance numbers. She said these growth patterns suggest the numbers are being manipulated. That was a serious accusation, said the head of legal with a frown. She demanded to know on what basis Sophie was making this claim. Sophie explained that there were patterns in the way the data was put together. When computers automatically generate reports, she explained, they create subtle patterns around page breaks. But when you compare this company's monthly reports to their quarterly reports, the patterns are different. This suggests that the reports were not generated from the same source data. This meant they were making up their numbers. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He said that meant they were cooking the books. Sophie said she believed so, yes. David Pierce shook his head. He said this was ridiculous. He pointed out that they had already had 3 different teams of experts review the target company's financial records. Nobody had caught this, he said. Sophie replied calmly that they would not have found it, because it was not about the numbers themselves, but about the patterns in how the numbers were reported and organized. She said it was not a common thing that people caught. David Pierce looked openly skeptical. He asked, "And you just happen to know how to find these obscure patterns in data?" Then Pierce's tone shifted. He pointed out that nobody really knew anything about Sophie's background or what her actual qualifications were. He said maybe she was working for a competitor and trying to sabotage their deals. The room fell uncomfortably quiet. Sophie felt her face get hot. This was exactly the kind of public attention and scrutiny that she had been afraid of. Marcus said flatly that he had reviewed Sophie's background himself, and her track record over the past 2 weeks spoke for itself. Pierce said with all respect, they did not know anything about Sophie's past or what her real experience was. He said bringing in a former server was highly unusual and questionable. Maybe there was a reason for concern. You brought in this waitress, Pierce went on, and suddenly she is telling our whole analytics department that they are wrong about our biggest potential investment. Something does not add up. Sophie just stood her ground silently. Pierce asked her directly who she really was. Sophie replied that she was exactly who Marcus hired her to be, someone who noticed patterns that other people missed. Pierce said it was a convenient skill, almost like she had received professional training. Yet her resume showed nothing of the sort. Sophie said her background was not relevant to her ability to do this job. Pierce said actually it was entirely relevant when she was advising on billion-dollar business deals. Pierce turned to Marcus and said that he had taken it upon himself to run a deeper background check on Sophie without Marcus's permission. He did this to protect the company. Marcus's expression turned dark with anger. Pierce said that Christina Matthews, that is the name Sophie had given, only appeared to exist 3 years ago. Before that, there was absolutely nothing. No credit history, no employment record, no social media presence. She just appeared out of nowhere at age 22. Sophie felt the blood leave her face. Pierce had no right to do that. Pierce said, actually, as chief of staff responsible for protecting the company, he had every right. Pierce pulled out a file. He said their mysterious consultant was either using a fake name or had gone to extreme lengths to erase her entire past. Either way, could they really trust her with decisions about sensitive financial deals? The room filled with people whispering and murmuring to each other. Sophie looked at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression she could not read. Marcus said abruptly that the meeting was adjourned. He said everyone should get out except Sophie and except for Pierce. The executives filed out of the room, looking back over their shoulders with curiosity. When the door closed behind them, Marcus turned to David Pierce. His voice was quiet, but it sounded dangerous. Marcus said never undermine him like that again. Jack said, come on, be reasonable. That was not a suggestion, Marcus said. His voice was still quiet, but had become lethal. He said Pierce was on thin ice. He told Pierce to get out. Pierce hesitated, then gathered his papers and left, closing the door with a soft click that somehow seemed more threatening than a loud slam. Alone with Marcus, Sophie felt her carefully constructed world beginning to fall apart. She had not expected the background check to go so deep. Marcus said, sit down. His tone was gentler than it had been with Pierce, but still firm. Sophie sat, her mind racing through her options. She could deny everything. She could tell a partial truth. She could confess everything. Marcus asked if what Pierce said was true. He asked if she had appeared out of nowhere 3 years ago. Sophie met his gaze directly. She said yes. Marcus nodded slowly. He said he had suspected as much. The disconnect between her skills and her resume was too significant to explain any other way. He leaned forward. He asked who she was before she became Sophie Chen. Sophie said she could not tell him who she was before. Marcus asked if she meant could not or would not. Sophie said both. She straightened her shoulders. She said her past was her own business and it had nothing to do with the work she was doing for him. Marcus said it did if it put his company at risk. His expression was serious. He asked directly if she was running from something illegal. Sophie said no. That much was true at least. She said she had never broken any laws. Marcus asked if she was in danger. The question caught her completely off guard. He asked if someone was trying to hurt her. Is that why she changed her identity? There was genuine concern in his voice, which confused Sophie even more than the question itself. She said no, it was not like that. Marcus studied her face. He said that right now he had a chief of staff who thought she was a corporate spy. He had executives who were questioning whether they could trust her. He had mounting evidence that she was hiding something really significant. He said so he needed to know what it was like then, because running away again did not seem like a good solution, He asked, was running her solution to everything? The comment stung, mainly because it was partially true. Sophie said she was not running. She said she was protecting herself. Marcus asked, protecting herself from what? Jack's voice showed frustration. He said, I have given you everything you asked for. Anonymity, remote work, exceptional compensation. I have defended you against my own staff. What more do you need from me to trust me with the truth? Sophie said it was not about trust. Marcus said that was exactly what it was about. He moved closer to her. He said, you have spent 3 years hiding. At some point, you have to decide if you are going to live your whole life looking over your shoulder or face whatever you are running from. His words hit uncomfortably close to home, and they sparked a flash of anger in Sophie. She shot back that it was easy for him to say. She said, you have never lost everything in a single day. You have never had your entire life stolen from you. You have never been betrayed by. She stopped herself, realizing she was saying too much. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He asked, betrayed by whom? Sophie grabbed her bag. She said she was leaving. Sophie said that Marcus's consulting agreement had a termination clause. She said, consider this her notice. She headed for the door, her heart pounding very hard. Marcus said quietly, I know who you are. Sophie froze, her hand on the doorknob. Marcus said, Elena Richardson, former senior analyst at Sterling Financial. You specialized in emerging markets, and you were considered a rising star until 3 years ago, when you were implicated in an insider trading scheme that cost investors millions. You disappeared right before the SEC investigation concluded. Slowly, Sophie turned to face him. Her worst fears were confirmed. She asked how long he had known this. Marcus said he suspected something from their first conversation at the restaurant. He said the background check confirmed his suspicions last week. Sophie stared at him. She asked, you have known for a week and did not say anything? Marcus said he was waiting for her to trust him enough to tell him herself. Sophie said so, this was all a trap. She said he hired her, waited for her to incriminate herself, and then, what, turn her into the federal authorities? Marcus's expression hardened. He said if that was his plan, he could have done it already. Then what do you want from me? Sophie demanded. Marcus stepped closer. He said the truth. He said the real story, not the official version that made her hide. Sophie felt cornered and completely exposed. She asked why would he believe anything other than the official story. Marcus said because he had watched her work for 2 weeks. He said she had an ethical compass that did not match someone who would commit fraud. He said also because the Elena Richardson case from 3 years ago never seemed right to him. Even back then, Sophie felt a surge of something unexpected. Hope. Dangerous and extremely fragile. She said it does not matter now. She said the damage is done. She said my reputation is destroyed. She said my career is over unless somehow the truth comes out and I can prove my innocence. Marcus held her gaze steady. He said, tell me what really happened, Elena. The sound of her real name, unspoken for 3 years, broke something inside her. The words rushed out after years of silence. Sophie said I was set up. She said it was done by my fiancé, Robert Sterling. Sterling? Marcus asked. As in the founder's son? Sophie said yes. She said the golden boy of Sterling Financial Group, destined to run the company someday. She said they were engaged. She thought she knew him. What happened? Marcus asked. Sophie moved away from the door. The weight of keeping her secret finally lifted. She said she had discovered irregularities in some of their Asian market accounts. She said there were significant discrepancies that suggested insider trading. When she investigated, she found that the trail led directly back to Robert and his father. She said they were using private knowledge of what the firm was going to do to make their own personal investments through secret companies, so nobody would know they were doing it. Marcus nodded. He said, and you confronted them. Sophie said yes, stupidly. She said she thought Robert would do the right thing. She shook her head at her own naivety. Instead, she said, he apologized. He promised to fix everything. He asked her to keep quiet for just a few days. Sophie said she believed him. The next morning, the SEC raided their offices. Somehow, all the evidence pointed to her. Sophie said there was her signature on documents she had never seen. There were transactions that had been authorized through her login credentials. There were offshore accounts opened in her name. Everything had been set up perfectly to frame her. Marcus said quietly that it was a perfect frame job. Sophie said Robert appeared absolutely devastated by her supposed betrayal. She said his father publicly said that nobody, not even his future daughter-in-law, was above the law. They had to do what was right. Sophie's voice hardened. She said, meanwhile, they froze all of her bank accounts. They seized her assets for the investigation. They spread rumors that destroyed her professional reputation completely. By the time Sophie realized what was really happening, it was too late to stop it. "So you ran," Marcus said. Sophie said she disappeared. She said she changed her name and started completely over with nothing but the clothes on her back. She met his gaze defiantly. She said, "I was not guilty, but I could not prove it." She said, "I refused to go to prison for their crimes." Marcus was quiet for a moment while he processed everything she had said. He asked why she did not fight back. He asked why she did not go to the media with her story. Sophie said, "With what evidence?" She said they erased anything that incriminated them and made fake evidence against her instead. She said it was her word against the Sterling financial empire. She shook her head. She said even her own parents stopped believing her and thought she was guilty. Understanding came into Marcus's eyes. He said, "So that is why my investment portfolio looked so familiar to you." He said, "You recognize fraud patterns because it is similar to what the Sterlings did." Sophie nodded. She said, "Exactly." Marcus moved to the window and looked out at the whole city as he thought about what she had told him. He said the Sterlings have a reputation for being ruthless, but this goes way beyond that into real criminal territory. He said now he understood why she could not be publicly associated with any financial institution. If they found out she was working in finance again using her knowledge, they might worry she was gathering evidence against them. Marcus finished the thought. Or they would simply want to make sure she stayed discredited, Sophie said. Marcus turned back to face her. His expression was determined. He asked what if they could prove her innocence. Sophie laughed bitterly. She said after 3 years that was impossible. She said any evidence was definitely long gone by now. Marcus said maybe not. He said his eyes had that focused intensity she had learned to recognize when he was thinking through a strategy. Financial criminals are creatures of habit, he said. If they framed you, they have probably used similar tactics against other people. What are you suggesting? Sophie asked. Marcus said that they investigate quietly. He said they would find their pattern and build a real case. Sophie stared at him. She asked why he would do this. She asked why risk his company, his reputation for someone he barely knew. Marcus was silent for a moment. His expression became softer and more vulnerable than she had ever seen it before. He told her that he had spent his whole career watching people like the Sterlings abuse their power, while talented people like her had to pay the price. He moved closer to her. He said, because in the 2 weeks you have worked here, you have shown more integrity and real brilliance than most people I have known for years. The sincerity in his voice was unexpected and very disarming. Elena had spent 3 years trusting nobody, suspecting everyone around her. The idea of having an ally, especially someone as powerful as Marcus Webb, was both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. Sophie said it was too dangerous for him. She said, I have made my career by taking calculated risks. Marcus's expression turned grim. He said, besides, Sterling Financial is a competitor that uses unethical tactics. Taking them down serves justice and also serves my business interests. He made it sound simple. Sophie said, you make it sound simple. Marcus said it will not be simple. But between your inside knowledge and my resources, he let the implication hang in the air. Sophie felt something she had not experienced in many years. Possibility. The chance, however slim it might be, of reclaiming her real name, her real life. Sophie said, if we do this, it has to be airtight. She said no loose ends, no assumptions, and absolutely nobody can know. Not David Pierce, not your executive team, nobody at all. Marcus nodded. He said agreed. He said, and if it starts to become too dangerous, if there is any sign that they suspect what we are doing, we stop immediately. He said, I will follow your judgment on that. He extended his hand. He said, partners. Sophie hesitated only briefly before taking his hand. She said, partners. As their hands met, Sophie felt something strange, like two people joining forces against a common enemy. But it was more than that. There was an unexpected trust forming between two people who were both used to trusting nobody. What neither of them knew was that across town in the expensive offices of Sterling Financial Group, Robert Sterling was reviewing a security report that had flagged something unusual. There had been a pattern of searches in their database. The searches were focused on transactions from 3 years ago, the exact same transactions that had been used to frame Elena Richardson. The hunt had already begun. For the next 2 weeks, Elena and Marcus worked in complete secret, building their case against Sterling Financial Group. During the day, she continued her consulting work under her Christina Matthews identity. At night, they went through financial records, searching for the patterns that would prove what Robert Sterling's crimes really were. They converted a secure room in Marcus's penthouse apartment into their investigation headquarters. The walls were covered with timelines, transaction records, and photographs of key players. This space became their sanctuary, the only place where Elena could fully be herself and not hide anything. One evening, Marcus announced he had found something. Elena was reviewing Sterling's Asian market trades at the time. She looked up to see Marcus holding a stack of printouts. His face showed excitement. After countless hours of working together in this private space, she had learned to read all his subtle mood shifts. She could see the slight crease between his eyebrows when he was concentrating hard. She could recognize the almost invisible smile he made when he discovered something important. She asked what he found. Marcus said he had found 3 more cases with patterns almost identical to Elena's case. All were talented analysts who had discovered something wrong. All were suddenly blamed for fraud. All had their professional lives completely destroyed. His voice held controlled anger. He said the Sterlings have been systematically eliminating threats from inside their own company. Elena studied the cases. Recognition dawned on her. She said, "I knew 2 of these people. They were brilliant analysts. I never believed they were guilty." Marcus said they were not guilty. He pointed to transaction records. He said the signature methods used in your case are exactly the same. Falsified authorizations, manufactured evidence, the same timing between discovery and the takedown. Elena felt a surge of vindication mixed with sadness for her former colleagues. She said this proves it is a pattern, but not that the Sterlings are responsible. Marcus said no, but this might. He pulled up an email on his secure laptop. He said his team had intercepted communications between Robert Sterling and their compliance officer, discussing how to handle internal threats. Elena said that is still circumstantial evidence. She said we need concrete evidence linking them directly to the fraudulent transactions. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that had become familiar during their late-night sessions. She said, "You are right. We need an insider." Elena tensed. She said that is too risky. She said anyone close enough to have that information is either part of it or completely under their control. Marcus hesitated. He said not necessarily. He asked what about her former assistant at Sterling Financial Group. He said his name was James Chen. Elena stared at him. She asked how he knew about James. Marcus said background research. At her expression, Marcus had the grace to look somewhat sorry. He said I needed to understand all the players involved. He said James was reassigned after you left. Elena said I have no idea where he is now or if he even remembers me. Marcus pulled information up on his computer screen. He said James is working in their London office now. He is still employed by Sterling Financial, but he has been isolated and effectively demoted. Elena studied the information. She said memories of her earnest young assistant flooded back. She said James was loyal to me. He never believed the accusations against me, which is probably why they have gotten rid of him. Marcus met her eyes. He said he might help us. Elena said, or he might report back to Robert immediately. She shook her head. She said it is too dangerous. Marcus asked if living in hiding for the rest of her life was less dangerous. He challenged her directly. He said at some point, we have to take calculated risks. Before Elena could respond, Marcus's private phone rang. He checked the caller ID and frowned. He said it was David Pierce at this hour. He put the call on speakerphone. He said this better be important. Pierce's voice sounded tense. He said Robert Sterling just called him. Pierce said Sterling wants to meet with Marcus tomorrow. He said Sterling claims he has a mutually beneficial business proposal. Elena froze. The blood drained from her face. Marcus's eyes locked with Elena's. He asked Pierce carefully if Sterling said what kind of proposition. Pierce said a potential partnership on Asian market expansion. He said Sterling specifically mentioned Marcus's recent interest in those exact markets. The same markets Elena had been researching. It could not possibly be a coincidence. Marcus said after a brief pause, schedule it. He told Pierce his office at 2 p.m. He said, we will do. Pierce hesitated. He said, Jack, I should mention something. He said Robert asked if Marcus is still working with the consultant with the remarkable insights. He said those were his exact words. Elena felt her heart stop completely. She could barely breathe. Marcus asked if Sterling mentioned anyone by name. Pierce said no, just that description. Marcus said tell him that his consulting arrangements are confidential. He asked is there anything else? Pierce said that is all. He asked should I be concerned? Marcus's tone was dismissive. He said no. He said it is just the usual corporate fishing. Good night, David. He ended the call and the room fell into heavy silence. They know, Elena whispered. Somehow they know I am working with you. Marcus shook his head. He said they suspect, but they do not know for certain. He said if they had proof, Robert would not be making social calls. He would be threatening legal action. This is exactly what I feared. Elena began pacing and panic started rising inside her. She said, I need to disappear. She said, change identities again. Move to different cities, stop. Marcus stepped directly into her path. His hands came to rest on her shoulders. He said, running is exactly what they want. It reinforces the narrative that you are guilty. What choice do I have? She asked. Her voice cracked with frustration. They destroyed my life once. They will do it again. And this time they will destroy you too. Let them try. The quiet confidence in Marcus's voice made her pause. He said, I am not some junior analyst they can intimidate. I am Marcus Webb. My company is worth more than theirs. My political connections run much deeper, and unlike them, I do not have a history of suspicious analyst departures. Elena looked up at him, realizing how close they were standing. In the weeks they had worked together, something fundamental had shifted between them. A growing trust, yes, but something more. Something that made her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She said quietly, You do not understand what they are capable of. Marcus said, I understand exactly what they are capable of. His hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. He said, what you do not understand is what I am capable of when someone threatens people I care about. The simple declaration stunned her. 3 years of isolation had made her forget what it felt like to have someone in her corner. Someone willing to fight for her. She asked, why are you doing this, Jack, really? The question had been building for weeks inside her. You have built your reputation as a ruthless businessman. Why risk everything for me? Marcus was silent for a moment. His expression became uncharacteristically vulnerable. He said, because when you walked into my life, you were the first real thing I have encountered in years. His voice was low and honest in a way she had never heard before. He said, everyone in my world wants something from me. Money, connections, or status. You challenged me. You saw through me. You called me on my arrogance. And despite everything you have been through, you still have more integrity than anyone I know. The raw sincerity in his voice made her speechless. He added, also, I really hate losing, and I am not about to let the Sterlings win. Despite everything, Elena laughed, and it was a genuine sound that surprised them both. She asked, so what is your plan? Walk into a meeting with Robert Sterling and accuse him of framing me? Marcus said no. He said Jack's eyes gleamed with strategic calculation. He said I'm going to make him think I am interested in his proposition, while using the meeting to gather intelligence. He said he will be suspicious, of course, but his ego will not let him pass up the opportunity to assess whether I know about you. Marcus released her shoulders, stepping back to give her space. He said, meanwhile, you will be monitoring the meeting remotely from a secure location. What? Elena said. No, that is too risky. Marcus said it is controlled risk. He said you know Robert better than anyone. You will recognize his tells, the hidden meanings in his statements. Elena considered the strategy. It was dangerous. But Marcus was right. This might be their best chance to gather information. If he discovers I am involved, she said. He will not, Marcus said. His confidence was unwavering. Trust me, Elena. Those 2 words, trust me, had been the downfall of many people. Yet looking at Marcus now, Elena realized she did trust him, perhaps more than she had trusted anyone since her world collapsed. She said, all right. But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks. Marcus said, agreed. He checked his watch. He said, it is late. You should get some rest before tomorrow. Elena nodded and began gathering her notes and papers. As she packed up, a realization struck her. She said, I cannot go back to my apartment. If they are watching you, they might be watching me too. Marcus did not hesitate. He said, stay here. He said, the guest suite is ready. He said, it is secure, private, and has a separate entrance. He said, no one will know you are here. His tone was practical, but his eyes held something more complex and deeper. The thought of staying in Marcus's penthouse, being that close to him, sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She said, just for tonight. As Marcus showed her to the guest suite, which was luxurious yet understated, Elena felt oddly at home despite the unfamiliar surroundings. For 3 years she had been running, hiding, looking over her shoulder constantly. Tonight, for the first time since her world collapsed, she felt protected and safe. She said thank you simply as Marcus prepared to leave her at the door. He paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. For a moment, she thought he might say something or perhaps do something that would cross the careful boundary they had maintained. Instead, he simply nodded. He said, sleep well, Elena. As the door closed behind him, Elena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Tomorrow would bring a confrontation with the man who had destroyed her life. Tonight, she was under the protection of the man who might help her reclaim everything. The realization that she wanted more than just Marcus's protection was a complication she was not prepared to address, not with everything else at stake. Robert Sterling arrived at Marcus Webb's office building precisely at 2 p.m. He was a study in calculated charm. Tall and classically handsome, with the easy confidence of old money and family power, he greeted Marcus with the warmth of a longtime colleague rather than a competitor. Robert said, Jack, I appreciate you making the time for me. His handshake was firm and his smile was practiced. He said, impressive operation you have built here. From the secure monitoring room next to Marcus's office, Elena watched through one-way glass. A headset allowed her to hear every word that was spoken. Seeing Robert again, his familiar gestures, the way he casually adjusted his expensive watch, brought a flood of painful memories flooding back. She whispered into the microphone connected to the nearly invisible earpiece Marcus was wearing. She said, this is a mistake. He is too good at this game. Marcus gave no indication he had heard her. He smoothly directed Robert to the sitting area of his office rather than the more formal conference table. Marcus asked what brings Sterling Financial to his door. He said, we do not typically move in the same circles. Robert laughed easily. He said, that is precisely why I am here. He said, our firms have complementary strengths. He said, your tech innovations and our established Asian market presence seems like a natural fit for collaboration. Interesting timing, Marcus observed. He said, we have only recently begun exploring those markets. Robert's smile did not waver. He said, news travels fast in our business world. He said, word is you have been making remarkably astute moves in territories that are typically challenging for newcomers. Elena tensed. The reference was too specific and too detailed to be coincidence. She whispered to Marcus, he is fishing. He suspects but does not know for certain. Marcus replied non-committally that he had good people working for him. Robert leaned forward slightly. He said, in fact, I have heard you recently acquired quite the remarkable consultant, someone with unusual insight into market patterns. Elena's heart pounded. She whispered to Jack that this was exactly what she had been afraid of. Marcus said smoothly that they were always recruiting talented people. He said consulting arrangements were confidential. Robert sat back, apparently relaxed and casual. He said, speaking of talent, do you remember that unfortunate business with Elena? He paused, and Robert corrected himself. He said that was 3 years ago. Marcus raised an eyebrow in a picture of mild interest. He said vaguely, an analyst involved in some trading scandal. Robert corrected him. He said senior analyst. He said brilliant woman. He said we were engaged, actually. Marcus said he did not know that. Robert said few people did. He said we kept our relationship relatively private. Robert's expression shifted to practiced regret. He said it was devastating when we discovered what she had been doing, using client information for personal gain, manipulating positions. Elena fought the urge to scream at the blatant lies coming out of his mouth. Marcus observed that it sounded like a breach of trust on multiple levels. Robert said exactly. He said the personal betrayal was difficult, but the professional implications were worse. He said she disappeared before the full investigation concluded, which was essentially an admission of guilt. Or self-preservation, Marcus suggested mildly. He He said your firm has a certain reputation for handling internal issues in a very decisive way. A flicker of something crossed Robert's face briefly. Surprise, concern, worry. He recovered quickly and his smooth mask returned. He said they believe in accountability, as he was sure Marcus did. Absolutely, Marcus said. When applied to the right people, the subtle emphasis was not lost on Robert. His eyes narrowed slightly. Robert said the right people generally revealed themselves through their actions, do they not? The conversation had shifted from cordial to charged, with meanings layered beneath seemingly innocent exchanges. Elena said into the microphone, he is worried now. She said, change your approach. Ask him about recent personnel changes. Marcus smoothly redirected. He said, I noticed Sterling Financial has experienced significant turnover in your analytics department recently. He said that seemed unusual for a firm that values loyalty. Robert hesitated just long enough to confirm the hit had landed on target. He said they were restructuring to improve efficiency. He said it was standard business practice. Of course, Marcus said, though losing 4 senior analysts in 18 months seemed costly financially. He said the financial industry evolves. Some adapt, others do not. Robert's smile turned razor thin and dangerous. He said, but we are not here to discuss HR strategies. He said, I am proposing a joint venture in the Vietnam tech sector. He proceeded to outline a partnership proposal that on the surface appeared advantageous to both companies. As he spoke, Elena analyzed his presentation carefully, spotting the hidden traps and clauses that would give Sterling Financial privileged access to Marcus Webb's proprietary trading algorithms, his client lists, and his internal procedures. She said into the microphone that this was a data mining operation. She said the partnership was just covered to access his systems and information. Marcus listened to the proposal with polite interest, asking occasional questions that revealed nothing of his true thoughts and intentions. When Robert concluded, Marcus said he would need time to review the specifics with his team. He said markets moved quickly, but he appreciated the opportunity. Robert stood and began buttoning his suit jacket. He said, of course, take all the time you need, though markets move quickly, as you know. Marcus walked him to the door. He asked one question before Robert left. Marcus asked why approach him directly. He said their firms had acquisition departments for this sort of thing. Robert paused at the door, studying Marcus with newfound intensity. He said, let us just say I prefer to look a potential partner directly in the eye. He said it tells you much more than spreadsheets and projections ever could. Marcus asked, and what do you see? Robert said, a worthy adversary or ally, depending on your decision. Robert extended his hand. He said, I look forward to your response, Jack. Uden. After Robert departed and the door was closed, Marcus locked his office door and joined Elena in the monitoring room. She was already reviewing the recorded meeting, making careful notes on Robert's behavior patterns and tells. Elena said without looking up that he was definitely suspicious. She said the way he brought up her case so directly meant he was testing whether Marcus knew about her. She said he is not certain, though. She said do not underestimate him. Elena said Robert excels at appearing casual, while strategically cornering his prey like a hunter. Elena finally looked up and her expression showed she was troubled. She said the proposal is a trap. She said he wants access to your systems, your data, your information. Marcus said obviously. He asked the question as why. What does he expect to find? Elena considered the question carefully. She said evidence that I am working with you. She said transaction records, communications, anything that would confirm his suspicions and potentially implicate you in harboring someone like me. Then we give him exactly what he wants, Marcus said. His expression shifted to one Elena recognized, the strategic predator who had built a financial empire through calculated moves. Elena asked what he meant. Marcus said we accept the proposal with modifications that limit their access, of course. Then we use the partnership to access their systems instead. Elena stared at him in disbelief. She said that is incredibly risky for you. Marcus said high risk, high reward. His eyes held a determined gleam. He said we need internal documents to prove they framed you. He said this gives us a legitimate way in. Elena said there is nothing legitimate about corporate espionage, Jack. Marcus said it is not espionage if they invite us in. His smile held a dangerous edge. He said besides, we are not stealing trade secrets. We are gathering evidence of criminal activity. Elena stood and began pacing the small room. She said even if we could access their systems, what exactly are we looking for? She said they would have purged any incriminating evidence years ago. Marcus said no one purges everything. He said there are always traces, especially in an organization that size. Marcus leaned forward. He said, think, Elena. Where would the evidence be? She closed her eyes and mentally walked through Sterling Financial's infrastructure. She said the compliance department maintains untouchable archives because it is a regulatory requirement. She said Robert's father kept a private server for sensitive communications. She asked could they access either one. Marcus said possibly through the partnership, the private server. Elena shook her head. She said it was impossible without physical access to their headquarters building. Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking. He said, what if they had physical access? Elena laughed in disbelief. She asked, what are you suggesting, breaking into Sterling Tower? Marcus said, not breaking in, walking in, invited. His eyes met hers. He said, the Sterling Financial Charity Gala is next month. He said, every major player in the industry will be there. Elena asked, including you? Marcus said, including us. His eyes held hers. If we accept this partnership proposal, we will naturally be invited. He said it is the perfect cover. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She asked, you want me to attend an event filled with people who know exactly who I am? She said people who were involved in destroying my career. Marcus said not as Elena Richardson. His voice was gentle. He said as Christina Matthews, mysterious financial consultant who never appears in public until now. They will not recognize you. Elena said, will not they recognize me? Marcus said, will they? He said, it has been 3 years. You have changed your appearance, your style, your mannerisms. He gestured to her shorter, darker hair, her different makeup style, the subtle but significant changes in her presentation. He said, besides, people see what they expect to see. He said no one will be looking for Elena Richardson at Jack Anderson's side. The plan was audacious, bordering on absolutely insane. Yet Elena could not deny it had real potential. Robert's unexpected approach had created an opportunity they had not anticipated. She said it is a massive gamble. Marcus said life is a gamble. His expression softened. He said, but for what it is worth, I am betting on you. The simple statement delivered with such conviction touched something deep within her. She said, if we do this, we need a foolproof plan. She said contingencies for every single scenario, and a clear exit strategy if things go wrong. Marcus said he was already working on it. He said his confident smile returned. He said, trust me. By the time we are done, Robert Sterling will not know what hit him. As they began strategizing together, Elena realized something had fundamentally changed inside her. For 3 years, she had been reacting, running, hiding, surviving. Now for the first time, she was taking control. She was moving from defense to offense. The shift was both terrifying and exhilarating. So was the growing awareness that her feelings for Marcus had evolved beyond professional alliance or even friendship. Something deeper was developing, something she was not ready to name or admit, but could not ignore. As Marcus outlined his initial thoughts for their counterstrike against the Sterlings, Elena watched him with mixed feelings. He had become her champion, her partner in this dangerous game, but allowing herself to feel more would introduce a vulnerability she could not afford, not with everything else at stake. Yet when their eyes met across the table, the connection between them was absolutely undeniable. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined in ways neither could predict or control. The Sterling Financial Charity Gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum in New York into a showcase of wealth and power on display. Under the soaring glass ceiling, New York's financial elite mingled among ancient Egyptian artifacts. Champagne flowed as freely as insider information and gossip. Elena, now transformed into a polished version of Christina Matthews, stood at the edge of the large crowd, fighting the strong urge to flee and escape. Her dark hair was elegantly styled up. Her midnight blue gown was selected specifically to differ completely from anything Elena Richardson would have ever worn. Even her posture was different, more confident, more assertive than anyone would remember. You look absolutely stunning, Marcus murmured, appearing at her side with 2 champagne flutes. He was also completely unrecognizable in formal evening wear. Elena said, I feel like I am walking into the lion's den wearing a steak costume. She accepted the champagne, but did not drink from it. Marcus said, lions are predictable. These people are worse. He surveyed the room with calculated nonchalance, but he said the plan is solid. He said 20 minutes of strategic mingling. Then he would create a distraction while she slipped away. The plan was indeed meticulous and detailed. Using the partnership negotiations as cover, They had obtained the building's security protocols and codes. Tonight, while the company's leadership was occupied with the gala downstairs, Elena would access Robert's father's private office on the secure executive floor, using the credentials Marcus had obtained through his considerable resources and connections. "There is Robert," Elena whispered, spotting her ex-fiancé across the room. She said 3-0 with the silver-haired man. "William Sterling himself," Marcus observed. "He said father and son holding court together." Elena nodded. "They are watching us," she said quietly. "Let them watch," Marcus said. His hand settled at the small of her back. The touch was both reassuring and possessive. He said it is all part of the show. The show included presenting their relationship as more than professional. It was a calculated move to explain why Marcus would bring his reclusive consultant to such a high-profile event. The pretense came more naturally than Elena had expected. The chemistry between them required very little acting. "Marcus Webb." A booming voice interrupted their conversation. William Sterling approached with Robert half a step behind him. William said, "Glad you could make it." He said, "And this must be the brilliant Miss Matthews we have heard so much about." Elena met William's gaze directly. Years of suppressed anger were channeled into cool composure. She said, "Mr. Sterling, your reputation precedes you." He said, "As does yours, my dear. Though finding information about you proved remarkably challenging." His smile did not reach his eyes. He said, "Almost as if you appeared out of nowhere." "The best talents often emerge from unexpected places," Jack interjected smoothly into the conversation. Indeed, Robert's gaze remained fixed on Elena, studying her with unsettling intensity. He said, "You seem familiar, Ms. Matthews. Have we met before?" Elena replied, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. She said, "I do not believe so." She said I would remember. Robert suggested perhaps at a conference. Elena said, "I avoid public events generally." She said, "Tonight is an exception for Marcus, obviously." Robert glanced between them. He said how fortunate he is to have inspired such flexibility in your habits. The implication hung in the air, deliberately provocative and challenging. Marcus's hand pressed slightly firmer against Elena's back. He said, "Ms. Matthews has been an invaluable addition to my team." He said her insights on the Asian markets have been particularly useful for our partnership discussions. William Sterling nodded slowly. He said, "Speaking of which, they should finalize those details soon." He suggested perhaps over dinner next week. He said his office would be more appropriate for such discussions. "My office would be more suitable," Marcus countered. He said his team had prepared counterproposals to some of William's more ambitious requests for access and data. Blackwood. A flicker of annoyance crossed William's face briefly. He said, "Business is built on trust, Jack." "And verified by contracts," Marcus replied pleasantly. He said, "I trust you understand." The tension was interrupted by the arrival of the mayor, who was eager to speak with William Sterling. As the elder Sterling moved away, Robert lingered. His eyes never left Elena's face. Robert said, "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know, someone very special." Elena maintained her composure and said, "I get that a lot. I must have one of those faces." Robert said no. He shook his head slightly. He said, "You are quite unique, as was she." Marcus stepped subtly closer to Elena. He said, "If you will excuse us, Robert," he said, "I promise to introduce Christina to some potential clients." "Of course," Robert said. His smile was razor-sharp and dangerous. He said, "We will have plenty of time to become better acquainted through our partnership." As they moved away, Elena released a shaky breath. She said quietly, "He knows." She said, "He cannot prove it, but he definitely knows." Marcus said quietly to her, "Then we stick to the plan." He guided her through the crowd. He said, "The longer we are visible here, the more secure your alibi becomes." They spent the next 30 minutes strategically circulating through the gala, ensuring they were seen by as many important people as possible. All the while, Elena felt Robert's eyes following her every movement around the room. "It is time," Marcus said finally, checking his expensive watch carefully. "You remember the route?" Elena nodded. She said, "Service elevator to the 42nd floor, north corridor to the executive suite, secondary office at the end of the hall. The security pass will work on all doors except William's private office, which needs the key code Marcus had obtained somehow." Marcus said, "And if you encounter anyone, just say you are looking for the restroom." He said, "You got disoriented after too much champagne?" Elena forced a smile. She said, "Basic social engineering." Marcus's expression turned serious. He said, "If anything feels wrong, abort the mission immediately." He said your safety matters more than any evidence they could possibly gather. The genuine concern in his voice made her pause. Over the weeks they had worked together, Marcus had become far more than just an ally to her. The lines between their professional partnership and personal connection had blurred completely, creating something neither had fully anticipated or discussed. She promised she would be careful. She said 20 minutes, not a second longer. Marcus squeezed her hand. He said, I will create the distraction in exactly 5 minutes. Elena slipped away, moving purposefully toward the service areas of the museum. Behind her, she heard the first notes of a string quartet beginning to play. The gala's entertainment was beginning right on schedule as planned. The service elevator was exactly where their intelligence had indicated it would be. Using the security pass Marcus had procured, Elena ascended to the 42nd floor. Her heart was pounding, but her mind remained focused on the task. The executive level was dimly lit with minimal lighting. Security cameras were positioned exactly where they had expected them to be. Elena moved confidently, knowing the cameras would capture only a dark-haired woman in an evening gown. There was nothing to connect her to Elena Richardson or her past. William Sterling's private office was locked behind an unmarked door at the end of the north corridor. Elena entered the key code Marcus had somehow obtained, holding her breath until the lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside the office was a testament to old-world power and wealth. There was heavy mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, oil paintings of stern-faced Sterling ancestors on the walls. Elena moved directly to the bookcase that hid the entrance to William's private server room, remembering its location from her days as Robert's fiancée. The hidden door opened smoothly and revealed a small room with several servers humming quietly in the darkness. Elena plugged in the specialized drive Jack had provided. It was designed to bypass security and extract specific data patterns without leaving obvious traces. As the drive began working, Elena returned to the main office, searching for physical evidence. William Sterling was old school. He believed in paper backups and physical copies of the most sensitive communications. In the bottom drawer of his desk, hidden beneath innocuous files and papers, she found it. There was a locked metal box. Using the lock-picking skills she had acquired during her years in hiding, Elena opened it to find a collection of USB drives. Each one was labeled with only a date. One date jumped out immediately, 3 days before her world had collapsed. It was the day she had confronted Robert about the irregularities she had discovered. Elena's hands trembled as she pocketed the USB drive carefully. Then she checked the status of the data extraction. It showed 90% complete with 7 minutes remaining of her allotted 20. Suddenly, voices in the corridor froze her in place. 2 men walked closer, their footsteps echoing. One was saying Blackwood wants the security reports on his desk tonight. The other said he is convinced Anderson is up to something. At this hour, the gala is still going on downstairs. You know how he is. He is a paranoid bastard. The footsteps paused outside the office door. Elena held her breath, calculating escape routes in her mind. There was nowhere to hide effectively. Not if they actually entered the office. The door handle turned. In that moment, a commotion erupted somewhere in the distance. There was shouting and the sound of breaking glass. It was Marcus's distraction, right on cue as planned. What the hell was that? One guard said. The door handle released as the security guards responded to the more pressing and urgent concern. Check it out, one ordered urgently. I will continue the rounds, the other said. Elena remained motionless until both sets of footsteps receded and faded away. Then she moved quickly back to the server room. The extraction was complete. She removed the drive and erased all evidence of her presence very carefully. She slipped out of the office and closed the door silently behind her. The journey back to the gala was tense but uneventful in every way. As she approached the Temple of Dender, she could see Marcus at the center of attention. He was apologizing profusely to a server who was covered in champagne. The server's uniform was soaked. It was apparently the source of the distraction he had created. Elena circled around carefully, approaching Marcus from a different direction than she had left. This was exactly as they had planned it, she said quietly when she reached his side. Mission accomplished. She whispered it so only he could hear. The relief in Marcus's eyes was very palpable. He said, "Thank God, let us get out of here," he said urgently. As they made their excuses and moved toward the exit of the museum, Robert intercepted them. His expression was unreadable and hard to read. Robert said, "Leaving so soon?" Marcus explained smoothly that they had an early morning. He said the Vietnam proposal required attention. Robert nodded. His eyes stayed fixed on Elena. Robert said, of course, business first, always. He reached out and took her hand. He said, it was truly a pleasure, Ms. Matthews. I have the strangest feeling we have met before. Elena said, in another life, perhaps. She replied while holding his gaze steadily. Robert said, perhaps. He said, though, in her experience, people do not change as much as they think they do. She said, beneath new appearances, the essential nature remains. Elena could not resist the pointed response, especially after the betrayal she had suffered. She said some people change profoundly. Robert's grip on her hand tightened imperceptibly. His eyes narrowed. He said an interesting observation. He said Christina has remarkable insight into human nature. Marcus intervened, placing his hand over Robert's until he released Elena's hand. Marcus said Ms. Matthews has been an invaluable addition to my team. He said it is part of what makes her valuable to me. The tension between the three of them was electric and palpable. There were layers of unspoken meaning beneath the civilized exchange of words. Well then, Robert said finally. Until next time. In the car leaving the museum, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. That was too close, Marcus said. But worth it, he asked, nodding toward her evening bag where the USB drive and extraction device were secured. We will see, she said. She leaned back against the leather seat. Adrenaline was giving way to exhaustion. If what I think is on here is actually there. Marcus reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. He squeezed it gently. Whatever happens, Elena, tonight you stood your ground. You faced them directly. That counts for something. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his voice broke through her carefully maintained composure. 3 years of running, hiding, rebuilding from absolutely nothing. And now this moment of possibility, of hope, with the most unexpected ally imaginable. She said softly, thank you. She said thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Marcus's eyes held hers in the dim light of the car. He said, I believe in what I see. He said, from the moment you gave me that financial advice in the restaurant, I saw someone extraordinary. The honesty in his voice made her heart race faster. Without overthinking it or second-guessing herself, Elena leaned across the space between them and kissed him. The kiss was gentle at first. Then it deepened with 3 years of pent-up emotion. It held her fear and loneliness. It held his recognition of something genuine in a world of artifice and pretense. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. Marcus said, I have wanted to do that for weeks. His usual confidence was replaced by uncharacteristic vulnerability. Elena smiled and said, so have I. She said, but I was a bit preoccupied with corporate espionage and identity theft. Marcus laughed. The tension between them broke. He said, fair point. He said, though, I hope your schedule might be clearing up soon. She glanced out the window as they approached Marcus's building downtown. Tomorrow could change everything. And it did. The evidence on the USB drive and the server extraction exceeded their highest hopes and expectations. There were emails between Robert and William discussing how to handle the Elena situation. There were instructions on how to create false evidence. There were communications with SEC contacts to expedite the investigation quickly. Most damning of all was an audio recording of Robert's conversation with his father the day after Elena had confronted him about the irregularities she had found. Elena's blood ran cold when she heard it. William's voice said clearly through the speakers, she knows too much. She knows about the Asian accounts, the shell companies, all of it. Robert's voice replied confidently, I will handle Elena. By the time I am finished, her credibility will be destroyed. No one will believe a single word she says. After 3 years of hiding, of doubting herself, of rebuilding from nothing, Elena finally had vindication. She finally had proof. Working with Marcus's legal team, they carefully assembled the evidence piece by piece. They built an airtight case that they presented simultaneously to the SEC, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and select financial journalists at major newspapers. The fallout was spectacular and immediate. Sterling Financial's stock price plummeted as the scandal broke across every news outlet. Robert and William were indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, witness tampering, and obstruction of justice. Former employees came forward with corroborating stories of intimidation and frame jobs. Many had similar experiences to Elena's case. 3 months after the gala, Elena stood in Marcus's office watching the breaking news coverage. Robert Sterling was being escorted from his home in handcuffs by federal agents. She watched as the news anchors explained everything. How he had framed her. How he had destroyed her life. How it was all lies. Marcus asked, "How does it feel?" Elena turned to face him. She said it was surreal. She said for so long this seemed impossible. I had resigned myself to a lifetime of hiding, of being someone else. And now his hand found hers. Their fingers intertwined naturally. Now I can be Elena Richardson again. She smiled up at him. Though I have grown rather attached to certain aspects of Christina Matthews' life, Marcus raised one eyebrow. He asked, "Such as what?" Elena said, "Such as her job." She said her boss is quite impressive when he is not being arrogant. Marcus said, "Is that so?" He pulled her closer. He said, "I hear he is completely reformed, humbled by a certain financial wizard who served him the best investment advice he ever received, along with his overpriced steak." Elena laughed. The sound was free of the shadows that had haunted her for years. Then perhaps Christina should stay on as a consultant for professional reasons, of course. "Of course," Marcus said. His expression turned more serious. He asked, "And what about Elena Richardson? What does she want now that she has her life back?" Elena considered the question carefully. The future suddenly seemed wide open before her. Her professional reputation was being restored bit by bit. Her name was being cleared publicly. She could return to the financial world if she wanted. She could rebuild her career independently and successfully. But looking up at Marcus, she realized that her priorities had shifted significantly. The ambition that once drove her had been tempered by experience, by loss, and by finding someone worth more than professional success. She said softly, "She wants to build something new." She said something honest with someone who saw her value when she had absolutely nothing. Marcus's smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms. He said, "I think that can be arranged." As their lips met, Elena felt the final pieces of her fractured life falling into place. From a chance encounter born of arrogance and pride, through danger and vindication, they had found in each other something neither had expected. They found truth in a world of deception. They found strength in shared vulnerability. They found love that had survived the ultimate test. The broken pieces of Elena Richardson had not only been restored, they had been transformed into something stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more precious than before. And as Marcus held her close, she knew with absolute certainty that neither of them would ever face life's battles alone again. The future that stretched before them was uncertain, yes, but it was a future they would face together. That made all the difference in the world.